Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a doctor who refused to fight in the American Civil War. James Holloway established a neutral hospital where he treated soldiers from both sides, defying the armies and risking his life for his principle. But what happened next left everyone in shock. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story. The Healer's Oath. The first snow of December 1863 fell silently over the abandoned church as James Holloway arranged his medical supplies. 3 lanterns cast long shadows across wooden pews, now serving as beds for wounded men. The small church in this disputed slice of Western Virginia had become his refuge and battlefield. James wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold. He'd spent the morning extracting a Minié ball from a Union private's shoulder. The boy couldn't be more than 17, another fresh-faced recruit sent to die for a cause he barely understood. Water! The private stirred, voice cracking. Easy now. James lifted the boy's head, offering a tin cup. You'll be right as rain soon, Daniels. The Rebs, are they coming back? Fear sharpened the... Not today. James adjusted the bandage. Rest now. Outside, the snow accumulated on the crude wooden sign James had erected. Neutral ground, medical aid for all wounded. Below it, in smaller letters, all weapons surrendered upon entry. At the back of the church, 4 Confederate soldiers occupied beds near 2 Union men. An invisible line seemed drawn between them, honored, even weakened states. 6 weeks ago, James had found this abandoned church after fleeing the Battle of Bristow Station, unable to bear the senseless slaughter any longer. He wasn't a coward, despite what they called him. He'd enlisted as a medical officer with the Union Army, determined to use his physician's training from Philadelphia to save lives. But after 2 years of battlefields strewn with broken bodies, blue and gray alike, something had broken within him. I will not choose which men deserve to live, he had told his commanding officer before walking. The crunch of hooves on snow alerted James to a visitor. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside, where a bearded man on horseback surveyed the church, suspicious eyes. You, Holloway? His accent marking him as Virginian. I am. Got a wounded officer. Bad way. The man gestured to a second horse, dragging a makeshift stretcher. Heard you take anyone. James approached the stretcher. A Confederate captain lay unconscious, blood seeping through a crude bandage at his abdomen. Bring him inside, James directed, already assessing the wound. Gut shot? Cannon shrapnel. Been riding 3 hours to find help. As they transferred the officer to an empty pew, recognition struck James like physical blow. Beneath the blood and scraggly beard was a face he knew. Robert? The Confederate captain's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing familiar green irises before closing again. Robert Sinclair, his childhood friend from the Pennsylvania boarding school where they'd spent 4 years as inseparable companions. The same Robert who'd moved to Virginia at 17, their paths diverging when James went to medical school. You know him? Messenger asked. Once, I'd gathering his instrument. Wait outside. This will take time. For 3 hours, James worked meticulously, removing metal fragments and suturing damaged tissue. The wound was severe but had miraculously missed vital organs. Robert remained unconscious, which was mercy given the pain he would have endured. As James finished bandaging, the church door banged open. A Union patrol, 3 men led by a captain with a hard expression. So it's true, surveying the mixed uniform. The deserter doctor who treats Rebs. James straightened, keeping his voice level. I'm no deserter, Captain. I resigned my commission properly. To aid the enemy? The captain gestured to Robert's Confederate uniform. To aid the wounded, any wounded. That's treason, Holloway. It's medicine. James stepped between the soldiers and his patient. And this is neutral ground. All who enter surrender their weapons. The captain's hand rested on his holstered pistol. I surrender nothing to a traitor. Then you can't enter. James stood firm, his heart hammered. There are 2 of your men inside, Captain. Private Daniels and Corporal Wells, both receiving the same care as the Confederate wounded. Something shifted in the captain's expression. Surprise, perhaps even reluctant. I'll see them. Motioning, he unbuckled his gun belt and handed it to James. 5 minutes. While the captain checked on his men, James returned to Robert, who stirred. Jamie? Robert whispered, using the old nickname. Is that you? Save your strength, James replied, emotion tightening his throat. You're badly wounded. Robert's eyes focused briefly. What uniform are you? None, James. Not any more. Confusion crossed Robert's face before pain pulled him back to unconscious. The Union captain approached, having completed inspection. Your work is Adequate, he admitted grudgingly. But this can't continue. This area will be an active combat zone within days. Then help me evacuate these men to proper hospitals. Impossible. My orders. Damn your orders. James's composure cracked. These are men, not pawns. Union or Confederate, they bleed the same. The captain studied him with narrowed eye. They say you're mad, Holloway. Others say you're the only sane man left in this war. He retrieved his gun belt. We move out at dawn. Any of your patients well enough to travel should be gone by then. After the patrol departed, James slumped onto a stool, exhaustion washing over him. Through the window he watched more snow falling, covering the churned earth and bloodstains outside. Nature's temporary peace over man's persistent violence. At the threshold between warring sides stood James Holloway, no longer Union, never Confederate. A man who'd found his own battle line to hold. As night descended, he checked each patient methodically, lingering last at Robert's bedside. Their paths, once aligned, then divided by geography and ideology, had converged again in this unlikely sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the armies pushed closer and his position grew more untenable. But tonight, in this snow-shrouded church, James had created something rare in this torn country, neutral ground, where healing, not killing, was the only allegiance. Divided loyalties. Dawn broke cold and clear, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. James had worked through the night, snatching moments of sleep. Robert's fever had finally broken, his breathing steadier. You look terrible. Eyes focus a first time. You're one to talk. Lie still. The shrapnel tore you up badly. Where am I? St. Matthew's Church? What's left of it? James checked the bandage. You're safe, for now. Robert's gaze drifted to a Union soldier. You're treating Yankees too? I treat whoever needs help. James's tone ended further discussion. The Union captain returned as promised, this time with a wagon. For my men, he explained curtly. Daniels isn't stable enough to move, James protested. War doesn't wait for healing, Doctor. The captain, Matthews, he'd finally introduced himself, surveyed the room. Confederate patrol was spotted 3 miles south, moving this way. James tensed. Captain, I need more time. Matthews nodded to his men, who began preparing the Union wounded for transport. I suggest your rebel patients clear out too, if they can walk. As Matthews supervised the evacuation, Robert grasped James's sleeve. Jamie, listen to me. His voice was urgent despite its weakness. You need to leave. When that Confederate patrol arrives, they'll be less understanding than your Union captain. I'm not abandoning patients. Your patients will get you killed. Robert winced. He shifted. Colonel Davidson commands that patrol. He's heard of you. The neutral doctor calls you a traitor to Virginia. I'm from Pennsylvania. Doesn't matter. This land is Virginia to him, and you're helping Union soldiers on it. Robert's eyes held genuine fear. Davidson shoots deserters on sight. A neutral doctor will fare no better. Before James could respond, a young boy appeared at the door, 12, perhaps 13, with a gaunt face that had seen too much. Dr. Holloway? Ma says to warn you. Riders coming from the South Road. James, thank you, Eli. Get home. The boy vanished as James turned to Matthew. How soon can you move out? 10 minutes. Matthews studied him. You should come with us, Holloway. And abandon the Confederate wounded? James shook his head. What happened to that's treason? A reluctant smile touched the captain's lips. Maybe I reconsidered. Or maybe you need more field surgeon. James turned away. Take your men, Captain. I'll handle the patrol. As the Union soldiers loaded their wounded onto the wagon, James prepared to face the approaching Confederates. He donned his cleanest shirt beneath his blood-spattered apron, a futile attempt at dignity. Jamie, Robert called him back. In my coat pocket, there's a letter. My authorization as a quartermaster officer. It might help. James retrieved the folded, scanning its content. You're not just captain. Major, actually, recently promoted. Robert attempted a smile. Davidson respects rank, if nothing else. The approaching riders appeared at the tree line. 8 men, led by an officer with a gray beard and cold eyes. James walked out alone to meet them, the letter in hand. This is a medical facility, he called as they approached. Neutral ground. Colonel Davidson dismounted, looking past James to the church. There's no neutrality in war, Doctor. You're either with Virginia or against her. I'm with the wounded, James replied, including Major Robert Sinclair of your army. Davidson's eyes narrowed. Sinclair is here? Recovering from shrapnel wounds. James offered Robert's letter. He's under my care. The colonel read the paper, his expression unchanging. "And the Union soldiers? Evacuated this morning. So you did aid them." Davidson handed the letter to an aide. "That makes you an enemy collaborator." "That makes me a doctor," James corrected, fighting to keep his voice steady. "The Hippocratic Oath doesn't recognize uniform." "Admirable sentiment." Davidson's tone suggested otherwise. "Unfortunately, military law supersedes your personal ethics." James stood his ground. "Will you shoot a civilian doctor tending your own wounded, Colonel? How will that report read to Richmond?" A tense silence fell. Davidson glanced toward the church where Confederate wounded watched from windows. "You have 1 hour to evacuate my men. Then this building will be requisitioned for military use. You can depart with them or face arrest. The worst cases can't be moved, James." "Not my concern." "It should be." James stepped closer. "Your own surgeon? Where is he?" Davidson's jaw tightened. "Lost at Bristow Station." "Then you need me." James pressed his advantage. "Let me continue my work here. Your men receive care, and I remain neutral." "There is no neutral." "Then I'm a Confederate surgeon, temporarily." James hated the words, but continued. "Until your wounded are stable. Then I walk away, free and clear." Davidson studied him with cold calculation. 2 days, then we torch this place. Makes good smoke cover for our movement north. After the colonel departed to establish camp nearby, James returned inside, shaking with suppressed rage. "That went well," Robert observed dryly. 2 days before they burn this place?" James began gathering essential supplies. "The immobile patients will die if moved," grimly. "I won't accept that." James checked it, running dangerously low. "There's a Union field hospital 20 miles north. If I could get a wagon." "Davidson will never allow it. I'm not asking." James lowered his voice as Confederate soldiers entered to check on their comrades. "There's a settlement 3 miles east. Mostly women and children now. They might help." Robert grabbed his wrist. "You can't trust anyone, Jamie. Half the civilians would sell you out to either army for a sack of flour these days. Not Martha Wilson." James packed bandages into his medical. "Her son was my first patient here. Caught between Union and Confederate fire while hunting. I saved his leg." As James prepared to leave, Robert struggled to sit up. "Take me with you." "You can barely stand." "I can talk, persuade." Robert grimaced through pain. "And I'm still a Confederate officer. Might count for something." Against his better judgment, James helped Robert dress. The wounded man leaned heavily on him as they slipped out avoiding Davidson's sentry. They moved slowly through snow-covered woods, Robert's face gray. James supported him, acutely aware that every step reopened a wound barely closed. Thornfield paused for, "What? Remember? When you broke your ankle, I carried you 3 miles to school." James smiled. "I remember you complaining the whole way." "We're heavy." Robert's answering, "We were children then. Before all this, we're still the same people." Robert shook. "Are we? You chose not to fight. I chose a side. And look where both choices led us." James helped him up. "Come on. Martha's farm isn't far." As they emerged from the tree line, James froze. Black smoke rose from where the Wilson farmhouse should stand. Instead, charred timbers jutted from snow like broken bones. "No." James lurched forward, Robert stumbling beside him. The farm had been burned to the ground. No bodies visible, at least. Had the family escaped, Union or Confederate? Robert asked quietly. "Does it matter?" James stared at the destruction. "This family fed anyone who came to their door, helped everyone, like you." Robert's voice held new understanding. "This is what neutrality earns in war, James. No protection from either side." Standing before the ruined farm, James faced the futility of his position. He had rejected both armies, believing medicine transcended the conflict. But war respected no boundary, not even those drawn by compassion. "We need to go back," said gently. "Find another way." As they turned, a rifle cocked behind them. James raised his hand slowly, turning to face a Union sergeant with 5 men, all with weapons trained on them. "Well," the sergeant, eyeing Robert's Confederate uniform, "what have we here?" "No man's." "Don't shoot," keeping his hands visible. "I'm a doctor with a rebel officer." The Union sergeant kept his rifle. "Strange company for a doctor." "This man is my patient." James stepped slightly in front of Robert. "He's badly wounded." "Doesn't look wounded. Looks like a Confederate major sneaking behind our lines." The sergeant gestured to his men. "Search them." A soldier roughly patted down James, removing his medical bag. Another searched Robert, who barely remained standing. "He's a doctor, all right," the first soldier confirmed, displaying James's instrument. "And the Reb?" the sergeant demanded. The second soldier opened Robert's coat. revealing blood-stained bandages beneath. "Wounded, sir. Recently." The sergeant hesitated, lowering his rifle slightly. "What are you doing out here, Doctor?" "Holloway, James Holloway." He nodded toward the burned farm. "Looking for help, moving wounded from St. Matthew's Church. There's a Confederate patrol there. They're burning it tomorrow." Matthews mentioned the neutral doctor, said you were either a saint or a fool. "I've been called worse." James gestured. "Please, he needs to sit down." The sergeant considered them, then nodded. "Simmons, help the Reb." To James, "I'm Sergeant Miller. Captain Matthews sent us back to monitor Confederate movement. Didn't expect to find you wandering around with voice." As Robert was eased onto a fallen log, James explained the situation. Davidson's ultimatum, the immobile patients, his failed plan to seek help from the Wilson. "So you need wagons," Miller said, "and you expect us to provide them to evacuate Confederate soldiers?" "I expect nothing. I'm asking for humanity." Miller laughed. "Humanity left these parts long ago, Doc. Then be the ones to bring it back." James looked each soldier in the eye. "These aren't just Confederates. They're farm boys and shopkeepers, sons and fathers." "So were the men they killed," Miller countered. Robert spoke up, his voice strained but clear. "Sergeant, I understand you're reluctant, but burning wounded men alive, is that what you'll write home about? What you'll tell your children someday?" Miller's jaw tightened. "Pretty words from a Confederate." "I'm not speaking as an officer now." Robert pressed a hand, "just as a man asking other men to remember who they were before this war." An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally Miller sighed. "We have 2 wagons hidden half a mile north. Not military, requisitioned from abandoned farms. We could spare one." Relief flooded James. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Miller turned to his men. "Simmons, Taylor, fetch the larger wagon. Rest of you, help me scout a route back to the church that avoids Confederate pickets." To James, "We'll deliver the wagon after dark. 1 wagon. We can't risk more." As the soldiers dispersed, James helped Robert lean against it. "You should rest. You're bleeding again." "Worth it." Robert studied James with newfound respect. "You navigate between armies remarkably well for someone who claims to be neutral." "Neutrality doesn't mean ineffectiveness." James redressed Robert's wound with supplies for recovered medical. "I've learned which arguments work with which side. Appeals to honor for Confederates, humanity for Union." Robert winced as James tightened a bandage. "You understand men better than you admit." "I understand fear and shame." James worked methodically. "No soldier wants to feel he's abandoned everything decent about himself, even in war." They waited as afternoon faded toward evening. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness while James kept watch. When Miller returned alone, his expression was grim. "Change of plans. Davidson's men are patrolling all approaches to the church, and there's worse. Union forces are moving into position north of here. Major engagement, likely by morning." James's heart. "The church will be caught between them." "Precisely." Miller knelt beside. "My men are bringing the wagon, but we'll need to move carefully. The good news, Davidson has pulled sentries from behind the church for his patrol line. We might slip in unnoticed." After nightfall, they made their move. The wagon arrived, a large farm cart with a canvas cover, pulled by 2 bony horses. James and Robert were hidden beneath blankets in the back as Miller and 2 of his men drove toward the church, taking a circuitous, dense woods. They stopped 100 yards behind the building. No Confederate sentries visible, but lamplight glowed from the church window. "I count 4 guards at the front. Davidson himself left an hour ago. Repositioning for tomorrow's battle, most likely." "How many patients can this wagon hold?" 6 lying down. 10 sitting. "I have 8 who can't walk. 3 who can, but shouldn't." Miller, "We'll need to be quick and quiet. My men will neutralize the guards. No killing." "These are medical grounds." The sergeant gave him a hard look. "This is still a war, Doctor." "Then take prisoners, but no blood spilled at my hospital." After a tense moment, Miller nodded. "We'll try it your way. Get ready to move fast once we secure the building." The Union soldiers moved silently through the darkness. James and Robert waited, tension mounting as minutes passed. Then a low whistle, the signal. James helped Robert toward the church's back door. Inside, they found Miller's men binding and gagging the Confederate guards, who glared with impotent fury. "They didn't resist much," Miller explained. "Probably thought we were a much larger force." James moved quickly among his patients, prioritizing the most critical. "We'll take the worst cases first. Anyone who can walk needs to help those who can't." They worked rapidly, loading wounded men into the wagon. Confederate soldiers, well enough to move, helped their comrades without question, perhaps assuming this evacuation had been arranged by their own command. As they loaded the last critical patient, a voice rang out from the darkness. "That's far enough." Colonel Davidson emerged from the trees, flanked by mounted soldiers. Behind them, more Confederate troops materialized, surrounding the church. Miller and his men raised their weapons. James stepped between the opposing forces. "Colonel, these men need medical evacuation. They'll die otherwise." "So you collaborated with the enemy to arrange it?" Davidson's voice was cold, confirming what I suspected. "I sought help from anyone willing to give it," James replied. "As would you." Position. "The difference, Doctor, is that I know which side I serve." Davidson signaled his men. "Arrest them all. Shoot anyone who resists." As Confederate soldiers moved forward, a new sound cut through the night. Hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the north. All eyes turned. A company of Union cavalry appeared, led by a familiar figure in Matthew. "Federal troops, lower your weapon." Chaos. Confederates scrambled for cover. Union cavalry spread out, rifles ready. Caught between them stood James, Robert, and a wagon full of wounded men. "Hold your fire," James shouted desperately. "There are wounded here." For a suspended moment, no one moved. Two armies faced each other across a snow-covered churchyard, fingers on triggers, breath fogging in the cold air. Then Robert stepped forward, his Confederate uniform visible to all. "As the ranking officer present," he called out, voice carrying despite his weakness, "I declare these grounds protected under provisions for treatment of wounded, Article 79 of the Lieber Code, recognized by both governments." "Oyer!" A murmur ran through both lines. The Lieber Code, President Lincoln's recent instructions governing warfare, was known to all soldiers, though rarely invoked. "Major Sinclair," Davidson snarled, "you overstep your authority." "I invoke my right as a wounded officer," Robert countered, "and I recognize this location as a neutral medical facility under Dr. Holloway's authority." Matthews urged his horse forward slowly. "Colonel Davidson, I suggest we both withdraw. Dawn will bring plenty of fighting. Let these men have tonight." For a tense moment, Davidson seemed ready to order an attack regardless. Then, with visible restraint, he lowered his hand. "Dawn, Captain. My men will remember your faces." He turned his horse. "And yours, Sinclair?" As both forces reluctantly withdrew, James sagged against the wagon in exhausted relief. Robert stood beside him, swaying slightly. "The Lieber Code?" James asked quietly, a calculated bluff. Robert managed a weak smile. "It protects hospitals, not churches claiming to be hospitals. But most soldiers don't know the fine print." James shook his head in amazement. "So we have until dawn. If we're lucky." Robert glanced at the wagon of wounded. "Better make it count." Under the stars, they continued loading patients. Union and Confederate alike worked together, unified briefly by the more immediate battle against death. As for James Holloway, he had found his place at last, not on either side, but in between, in the narrow space where humanity still survived, the final choice. The remainder of the night passed in urgent activity. By lamplight, James supervised the loading of patients into the wagon, and a second cart provided reluctant in Matthew, those who could not be made comfortable at the church. The stone walls might offer some protection from the coming battle. "You should go with them." As dawn approached, the first wagon was ready to depart for the Union Field Hospital, escorted by Sergeant Miller. "And leave you alone?" "Not this time. Your wound will heal or won't." Robert adjusted his borrowed coat, his uniform hidden beneath. "I've made my..." James did. The night's events had forged something between them that transcended their divided loyalty, a shared purpose that felt more honest than any flag. As the eastern sky lightened, Matthews returned to the church. "Davidson's men are forming battle lines south. My company will engage them within the hour. The wounded need more time. War waits for no man." Matthews surveyed the remaining patients. "I've ordered the second wagon to leave immediately, using the western trail. It's your last chance to evacuate." "Some patients cannot be moved," James replied. "I'm staying with them." Matthews frowned. "You realize this church will likely be destroyed in the fighting? Then help me mark it clearly as a hospital." James met the captain's gaze. "Your Lieber Code protects medical facility." After a moment, Matthews nodded. "I'll send men to help you raise proper flag." He turned to leave, then hesitated. "Holloway, I still don't know you do this." "Because someone must remember we're all human," James answered simply, "even in war." With the captain's help, white flags with crude red crosses were raised above the church. James sent the second wagon away under escort, leaving him with 11 patients too critical to move, 5 Confederate, 6 Union. Robert, though wounded himself, worked alongside him, preparing for whatever came. By mid-morning, the sound of distant gunfire rolled across the hills. The battle had begun. James distributed what little morphine remained, prioritizing those in greatest pain without regard for uniform color. Northeast Ridge is falling. Watching smoke. Union forces have artillery advantage there, and Confederate cavalry is moving to flank from the west. Does it matter who wins if all these men die? Robert had the fighting moved closer. By noon, stray bullets occasionally struck the church walls. James moved his patients to the center of the building, away from windows. A shell exploded in the churchyard, showering the roof with dirt and debris. The building shuddered. We should move everyone to the basement. Too damp down there. The infections would worsen. James checked a Union corporal whose leg wound had begun seeping again. We stay and hope those flags mean something. Another explosion. Closer this time. A window shattered, sending glass across the floor. Jamie said quietly, if we survive this, what will you do? After the war? The question seemed absurd amid the chaos, yet James found himself considering it seriously. Open a practice somewhere. Quiet town where the only emergencies are farm accidents and difficult births. Sounds peaceful. What about you? Robert smiled faintly. Maybe I'll become your assistant. Learn to heal instead of harm. Before James could respond, the church door burst open. 3 Confederate soldiers stumbled in, one supporting a badly wounded companion. Doctor, the lead soldier gasped. Help him! James rushed forward, helping them lay the wounded man on an empty pew. The soldier's chest was a mass of blood, his breathing shallow. Rifle shot? James asked, cutting away for him. Artillery fragment. Line broke. Yankees pushing south. The soldier stopped as he recognized. Major Sinclair? Sir, we thought you dead. Not yet, Private. Robert helped James clean the wound. This is a neutral hospital. Remember that. The private nodded uncertainly, then stiffened as he noticed the Union wounded nearby. Sir, there are Yankees here. There are only patients, James corrected firmly. You stay, you abide by that understanding. Oh. The soldiers exchanged glances but nodded agreement. They were too exhausted to argue. As afternoon wore on, more wounded arrived, sometimes carried by comrades, sometimes dragging themselves to the church door. James treated them all, his supplies dwindling with each new arrival. Robert worked tirelessly beside, his own wound seemingly forgotten in the greater crisis. The battle sound shifted, then intensified. The church trembled with nearby artillery. Battle's moving this way, Robert said grimly. A tremendous crash shook the building as a shell hit the steeple. Wood splintered, and the cross toppled to the ground. We need to evacuate, James decided. Basement or not, it's safer than this. With help from the walking wounded, they began moving patients downstairs. James supervised from the main floor, directing the careful transport of the most critical cases. Another shell hit the church roof, collapsing a section near the altar. Smoke and dust filled the air. Jamie! Robert shouted over the noise. Last 2 patients coming up. As James turned to help, a deafening explosion tore through the western wall. The force threw him against a pew. Stunned, ears ringing, he struggled to his feet amid swirling dust and smoke. Robert, he called. Robert, a groan answered him. James found Robert pinned beneath a fallen beam, blood spreading across. Don't move, James ordered, examining the injury. The beam had struck Robert's wounded side, reopening the original injury and causing new damage. I'll get help to lift this. No time, Robert. Building's coming down. Get the others out. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Robert gripped James's arm with surprising strength. This is your purpose, Jamie. Saving who you can. Now go. Before James could argue, the remaining soldiers appeared through the smoke. Together, they lifted the beam enough for James to pull Robert free. They half-carried, half-dragged him toward the basement stairs as more of the roof collapsed behind them. In the relative safety of the stone basement, James worked desperate to stabilize Robert. The wound was severe. Internal bleeding his limited supplies couldn't address. The Union forces are advancing, a Confederate private, returning from a cautious survey outside. They'll be here within the hour. And Davidson's men? Falling back toward the river, sir. James finished bandaging Robert as best he could. You need a proper hospital. Too late for that. Robert's face was gray with pain. Jamie, listen. When the Union forces arrive, surrender yourself properly. Tell Matthews everything. I'm not... For once, stop being stubborn. Robert managed a faint smile. You've proven your point. Neutrality has its place, but now you have a choice to make. The shelling had stopped. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of Union troops advancing. As dusk fell, Captain Matthews himself entered the basement, accompanied by 2 stretcher-bearers. His uniform was smoke-stained, his face weary but triumphant. "Holloway, your hospital flag saved these men. We diverted artillery from this position when possible." "Thank you, James." Matthews noticed Robert. "Major Sinclair, you're now a prisoner of war." "He's a wounded man who needs immediate medical attention," James corrected. "Military status can wait." After a moment, Matthews nodded. "We've established a field hospital a mile north. We'll evacuate everyone there." He studied James. "Including you, Doctor. Your skills are needed." "As a Union surgeon again?" James asked. "As a doctor," Matthews. "The wounded don't care about your allegiances, only your abilities." James glanced at Robert, who nodded slightly. "I'll come," James decided, "on one condition: all patients receive equal care, regardless of uniform." Matthews considered this, then extended his hand. "Agreed." As stretcher-bearers began evacuating the wounded, James knelt beside Robert one last time. "Looks like we both chose a side after all," Roberts. "No," James corrected. "I chose the same side I always, the side of life." Robert smiled. "The most radical position of all." Outside, the war continued. But within James Holloway's hospital, another principle had prevailed, one that recognized the humanity beneath the uniforms, the shared blood that ran beneath blue and gray alike.